So we're now in a meta crisis for Destiny 2. Just a kind reminder to people, make sure you subscribe because it's super critical to the success of the channel. If you want more intellectual PVE content like this, then make sure you subscribe to the ongoing success of it to keep the lights running. Okay, so I made a community poll yesterday which has been very engaging, basically posing the question to you, the player. This isn't about me, it's about you. And I've asked people, basically, how can we balance the game for light subclasses, light and dark subclasses, versus prismatic builds? How can we do that? Because right now in the game, whatever they do to light subclasses, it doesn't really matter because the neutral game of prismatic is too strong. Okay, now it's like, look at this description. Now this baffled me. Okay, now look, it says wield the powers of light or darkness. Right, all right. But let's look at this. It says select prismatic subclass. It says this on the menu. Transcend the divisions and limitations of light and darkness. Can you believe it? The UI is telling you the meta of Destiny 2. I have never read that. I don't know why I've never read it. I should have read it. I should have read it in June, shouldn't I? The UI is telling you that prismatic is the meta. It literally tells you the limitations of light and darkness. Hey, I don't need to tell you that light and darkness is lagging behind. The game's telling you it. I think this is hilarious. I think it's absolutely hilarious that is a thing. Right. So we all understand that prismatic, whether it's Hunter, Titan, or Warlock, by the way, is stronger than light and darkness counterparts in PVE endgame. It's absolutely true. It's undeniable. You can't deny it. You cannot deny it because of its neutral game, etc. So now that we've established that, I made the community poll and I'll put it on the screen on what people voted, which, by the way, these numbers are going to be different as at the time of when I post this video. So if you haven't voted, go and vote because it's interesting. So I'm not going to read my own post, but I'm going to read the percentages of what people voted, and then we're going to extract everyone's thoughts and condense it into 5 critical changes or things that Bungie can do to sort out this imbalance between light and darkness and prismatic. So 10% of you voted for Nerf Prismatic. 55% of you voted buff light classes, 2 super bars. So I suggested 2 super bars. I'm going to elaborate on that in a bit. 55% of you were in for the idea of buff and light classes. Okay, 14% of you said don't nerf Prismatic, but nerf Transcendence instead. That's also true. Transcendence is the issue with Prismatic, not Prismatic itself. And lastly, buff Prismatic. Add more fragments and aspects. 22% of you said that. So those players are actually, in fact, wanting a buff to Prismatic, even despite on how good it is right now. But I know where they're coming from with it, and we'll elaborate on that as well. So I've read through all the comments, and there's loads of ideas. I've tried to condense it into 5 critical areas. There's more areas to explore with this topic. It's a very, very complicated topic. It's probably the most complicated topic in the game right now, and it's the biggest identity crisis we have in Destiny 2, in my opinion. Right, so how do we solve this imbalance of prismatic versus light and dark? So 5 critical points. Point number 1. Sunset. This is what you the players are saying. It's not what I've said. This isn't coming from me. Sunset all light and dark classes. Make a mono class. So do we understand what that means? That means have 1 subclass per character, which that means there will be only 3 subclasses, as opposed to right now there is what? 5 plus 6. 6 per character. So that's 18. So we're going to go from 18 to 1. But what they're saying by that is let Prismatic have every single super in the game. Let Prismatic have every grenade in the game, every melee in the game, so that you can fully build out your character to exactly how you want him. So some of the void fragments and the solar fragments, right, that are not on Prismatic, put them all there. Sunset all of this trash stuff and put it on the Prismatic. That's what people are wanting because they've experienced the Prismatic gameplay. They don't want to go back to single element classes. I would say at least 60-70% of you do not want to go back to light subclasses, and it's absolutely it's undeniable. Some people want to stay on the light subclasses, but generally that's the thing. So this to me isn't the route, but I can understand where they're coming from. See, it sounds bad to sunset dark and light classes, single elements, but let me tell you, even if they do that, it doesn't matter because on Prismatic, if everything was available on Prismatic, you could make a arc build on Prismatic. Entirely arc or entirely solar or entirely void or entirely strand and so on and so forth. So the build would not be sunset, but the community would look at this as very negative because they would see it as losing subclasses, even though you're not losing subclasses. So I don't think this is the way either. Prismatic users, I think, you've got a good argument, but my personal opinion, I respect the opinion that people are saying, but I do not agree with this. I think this isn't the right way to go about it. The reason is this. Law-wise, Guardians have always wielded the light. If we just have Prismatic, which is kind of a light and darkness thing, I think it's weird for Law just to have Prismatic. And I don't generally support Law over gameplay, but I do think that there's something inherently Destiny based to just be able to use a Striker Titan or a Solar Titan. I don't think it's the way. I think we buff light subclasses instead of doing what people have suggested with that. I do think though Prismatic should have more stuff. Like Titan should have more than just consecration. Why can't I build a Solar Titan on Prismatic with sunspots? I want a sunspot Prismatic Titan build. I don't maybe want to do consecration one day. It's maybe a Wednesday. I want to change to a Solar Titan because to run Hammer of Sol effectively is to run it on Sunbreaker. It's one of the only light subclasses that still holds up against Prismatic, kind of. So that's your pros and cons of the first point. Let's go to the second critical point of what people are saying. People are saying let's buff fragments on light and dark single elements. So they're saying to try and balance light and Prismatic, Prismatic stays the same as it is, but instead, so say for example, a Solar Titan can have more fragments. So total, we can get 6 fragments if we run the right aspects. Let's say we can get 10 fragments. Let's buff fragment slots up so that you can build more into solar fragments. I'm not a fan on this idea because I don't think it will move the needle. And here's why. A lot of fragments on single element builds, you don't need that many to cook with them. And I don't think it's going to move the needle just because we have 5 extra fragment slots, because a lot of the fragments need a buff. A lot of the fragments don't really matter. I mean, Ember of Singeing's nice. Ember of Char's nice. Ember of Torches is obviously meta. Ember of Combustion, not so much. Ember of Temperance, no, not really. There's all these sorts of fragments, and Solar's probably one of the better elements. Like if we go to Arc Titan, man, there's some bad Arc fragments. There's some good ones as well, like Spark of Haze, Spark of Beacons is fantastic, but there's some bad fragments that don't matter about anything. We've got bad fragments on Void as well, so I don't think that's the idea, unless they do buff fragments massively. Right, and then it is worth to run a Void Titan with 10 fragments as opposed to using a Prismatic with only 5 to 6 fragments. Is that going to move the needle? I don't think it will, but that's an idea what people have come out with. Let's move on to the next critical point. The next critical point is to nerf Transcendence. So Transcendence, right, I think I also agree with these people are basically saying Transcendence is the problem, not Prismatic, and I would agree with that because let's take Prismatic Titan, the strongest build in the game, probably, right? With Consecration and Knockout. What if we was to nerf its ability to regen for Transcendence? It wouldn't cook. It wouldn't. It would be very similar to a Solar Titan. You would get free melee charges. You might get a 4th if you build into a melee build, but then by the time you've used your 4th melee, you're then sort of scrambling to get another melee, and then you don't have your Transcendence to pop. Maybe your Transcendence is 20 seconds away because it's been nerfed. Then Prismatic's like, okay, it's more in line with light. So is this the way to nerf Transcendence? I think it is an option, but I don't know if it is the Transcendence is the problem with Prismatic 100% because you can get Transcendence in 10 seconds. I don't think as a player in PvE endgame, the critical word endgame means difficulty, okay? And I don't think us as players should ever be able to get a Transcendence quicker than 10 seconds. I don't even think 30 seconds is correct. I think it should take at least a minute of gameplay to get Transcendence, and that might be unpopular, but I think at least 50 seconds to a minute is fair. But I also don't think this is the route at all. This is just what people are saying. Do this because the actual build kit of Prismatic builds, it's not too crazy. You know, like if you read into the fragments, I mean, facet protection is kind of crazy, but that's because we get lots of Transcendence energy. We get Radiant. So what? We get Radiant. It's not breaking the game if you get Radiant via a melee. It's a very, very nice fragment to have, especially on Consecration Titan, but it ain't breaking the game. It's Transcendence that's breaking the game. It's 2 super bars. You've got 1 super bar, and you can argue that Transcendence on certain classes like Prismatic Titan is stronger than a super, and you can get it in 10 seconds. So I have an issue with it being that we can get it back so quick. So that's what people are saying, nerf Transcendence. I mean, I don't know if that's the route either, but that's the option. Okay, so these are the other options that I'm more into. This is the next critical point. The next critical point is to have a light Transcendence ability. A lot of people are saying this, and I'm a fan of it. So I'm a fan of this. I have a light Transcendence, okay, or a light, or 2 super bars. So, say for example, we take T-Crash, right? Let's go to T-Crash. So imagine if you're playing on a light subclass and you have 2 super bar recharge rates. That will be a way of balancing a light class versus Prismatic because you would have 2 T-Crashes back to back. This, in DPS scenarios, would maybe be worth the while using a light class. And in certain GM solo-wise, being able to back-to-back T-Crash or maybe back-to-back hammers or wherever it might be. That was my idea, but I also think the better option is light Transcendence. So what would light Transcendence be like? Well, let's take an example. So Transcendence gives us increased ability regen. Let's imagine for a second that there's a thing called light Transcendence. And whatever element you are on, right? So let's take Song of Flame. It's a first-person super. Imagine that you pop Transcendence. It's still first-person, but you gain a light within and you gain a adverb depending on which element you're on. So if you're on Arc, if you pop a Transcendence on Arc, you jolt everything. Any damage you do with any weapon will jolt. Now, that would be cool because let's take, for example, the Cold Steel Slammer. If we pop a Transcendence on a Striker Titan, the weapon, the sword, would also jolt everything whilst freezing them. Let's take Dragon's Breath. It does lots of ignition damage. If we pop a Transcendence while we're on a Striker Titan, for example, it will jolt and scorch. There will be unique interactions with exotics doing this. Let's take Sentinel. If we pop a Transcendence on Sentinel, everything's volatile. Right? On Solar, everything scorches. On Stasis, everything does stasis damage. You could pair that with Thunderlord so that Thunderlord does electric damage and it does stasis damage because you've popped a stasis behemoth light super thing. Right? I'm very fan of this idea. It would power creep the entire game. They would have to adjust PVE enemy combatants to fight against all this because not only would you have Prismatic very powerful, you would have all your light classes powerful. But I am a fan of that because if they nerf Prismatic just to be down to a light subclass level, I think we're going backwards and players aren't going to like that. I'm a guy of the old days of liking to use guns, but the game's moved on since then, and I have to move on with that, and I have to like what other people are liking to a degree. I'll give you my opinions. I'm very strongly opinionated about stuff, but we got to move with the times a little bit as well. Like I am somebody who's stuck in my old ways and can be at times. So even I am admitting it'd be better just to buff light classes as opposed to nerf prismatic. I think so. So here's the next one. Here's another way of buffing light classes. So say for example we take Striker Titan. Right now on Striker Titan, the only way to get a buff to T Crash is really to use Curious of a Fallen Star. Now you can only use a Star Eater exotic, right, on Prismatic. People are saying unlock exotic class items for light classes, right? So the light classes can use them. This might move the needle a little bit because you could use a Star Eater on a subclass, and then you could have some unique pairings. I still think that would be good. I think that would be good in addition to Light Transcendence. So you would have a Light Transcendence mechanic and be able to use exotic class items on light subclasses. There'll be some unique interactions that I can't think of right now. There's all sorts of things that you could do. So I think that's an option as well. Like, why is exotic class items locked to Prismatic? I really don't see why it has to be just that. I think, being able to have exotic class items on light classes, I think that is something that they can do for sure. So that's the 5 critical points on what I think they can do. Let me give you my prediction for next year, because that is important, and I think you as a guardian need to understand this, and you might not like it, what I'm going to say to you. So I wonder if that timeline's on here. Can we go on this timeline? Oh, we can. Look at this. This is cool. So Lightfall launches. Lightfall launches, we get Strand. Okay. In actual fact, can we go to Beyond Light? Oh, so Witch Queen launches, right? After Witch Queen launches, we get the 3.0 classes. We got Void, we got Arc, we got Solar, didn't we? Between that time, between Witch Queen to Lightfall, the 3.0 classes were wrecking the game. In my opinion, that was the best sandbox that we ever had in PVE, in my opinion. But think about the time that elapsed. It was 12 months. Now, when they bring out a new subclass, it was technically new subclasses with fragments and stuff. That subclass, those subclasses are inherently strong for 12 months. Then Strand comes out with Lightfall, right? That trumps all of your light classes, basically. It trumps them. Not all of them, not in every situation, but majority. Then, for the Lightfall era, Strand is strong for 12 months. And they buff it and they give it more fragments and it's super strong, right? Then we get Final Shape and Strand is trumped by Prismatic. Then you want to use Strand builds on Prismatic. There's not much. There is still points of using full Strand builds, of course there is. But are you seeing the pattern? Bungie will buff or nerf whatever they want depending on what the subclass was sold with. Whatever the expansion was sold with. They're on a 12-month cycle. Okay? So, Prismatic users, hello there, yes. Final Shape launched in June. Whenever Apollo launches, that will transition the game again, and they're gonna hit the game again with something, right? So I'm basically saying to you, I think they'll nerf Prismatic. I don't want them to. I've suggested to you what else they should do instead, but it's based on sales. We need to you need to all come to the conclusion. Look, we as players, yeah, they want us to have a good time, but when the new stuff launches, they want us to play with the new stuff because that's a marketing tool for us to play that stuff. It's based on a 12-month cycle. Not everything is. Okay, sometimes they can nerf something in a month, for sure, but it's all based on this 12-month cycle between expansion to expansion. During the Lightfall era, they wanted Strand to be king because that's the poster boy. Look, it even shows you Strand builds on the tooltip. It's telling you, when they advertised Lightfall, you need to play Strand, you need to play Blade Fury, that you need to. Final Shape comes out, right? They then want you to play with Prismatic. Look, it even says about the Light and Darkness theme, right? Which I know it was built into the lore, but it was also built into the subclasses, and they really, really wanted you to play Prismatic, and they still want you to play Prismatic right now. It's the poster boy or girl of the expansion. So yes, they have our best interests sometimes, but they're also trying to sell you an expansion, and the expansion comes with a subclass, and it has now since Beyond Light, really, since Witch Queen, really. There's always been some major sandbox changes, and I'm just saying that as a player for me, it's kind of annoying to wait 12 months to then get something new for the old stuff to be like redundant a little bit. Yeah, and then get the new stuff, and that'd be good for 12 months. I don't like this 12-month cadence. And now I know that they do patches mid-season and all that sort of stuff, but I'm looking beyond that. Look beyond it, read between the lines. They're still trying to sell Final Shape because it's still the Final Shape year. So not everybody's like a D2 veteran. Some players are new lights. So they want to experience Prismatic in its flourish, its time in the sun. This is the time in the sun period. After June 2025 or May or whenever the damn expansion launches, the game's going to sell you something else. It's a harsh reality, but I figured that I would give you that pattern, and it is true because it historically is. I've explained it to you. I've just explained it to you. So that is the points about the light versus prismatic issues in the game. Hope you enjoy. Thank you.